As most of you guys already know, the DAC from Holo Audio is my favorite DAC that I have spent time with, but let's not forget, the price of admission for the Top Dog Kitsune Tuned Edition is going to set you back north of 5,000 smackaroos. With how quickly DACs evolve and change, many listeners are looking for a DAC that first and foremost doesn't suck, but also doesn't break the bank. After spending a few months with this little guy, the Merason Frerot, I gotta say that while not an R2R DAC and not as refined as the DAC, it does seem to be voiced in a way that does indeed remind me of what I love the most about the DAC. Also, did I mention the base configuration of this little guy is 5 times cheaper than the DAC? So yeah, let's chat about it. Now, before we dive in, this review is being sponsored by Well Pleased AV, with a wide selection of fantastic brands, including the new insanely gorgeous stuff from Vinny Rossi. Well Pleased is happy to assist you with all of your hi-fi needs. If you're interested in the Merason and would like to know more about this DAC, Well Pleased is ready to answer any follow-up questions that you guys have. And so, as always, everything that you need to know is down below in the description box. Thanks, guys. Sourced in Europe and manufactured entirely in Switzerland, the base configuration of the Frerot is 1350, which comes with an AC adapter for its power supply source. For those who want to take things to the next level, Merason also offers this linear power supply upgrade for an additional $900. We'll be talking about that and what you can expect with the additional power supply later, but for now, let's take a look at the DAC's functionality and feature set. Nestled inside the Frerot is a single BB1794A Burr Brown chip, which is slightly different in that it's a multi-bit DAC for the first 6 bits, which is pretty dang unique and cool. With that being said, the DAC is strictly a PCM DAC with a limit of 24 bits, 192 kilohertz, so if DSD MQA is important to you, then that's going to be a deal breaker before we even get started. Taking a look at the front panel, we are greeted with a clean and sleek design. The Frerot only has one knob on the front, which allows you to select from one of the 5 digital inputs. Besides the knob, there are 2 small LED lights, one displaying power and the other indicating when the DAC has locked onto the digital source that is being fed to it. On the business end to the left, the Frerot offers both XLR and single-ended outputs for flexible connections to your rig. To the right of these outputs, there are 2 digital coaxial inputs, 2 optical inputs, and 1 USB input. Beyond the connection banks, there is an input for the external power supply if you choose to go that route, and a simple rocker switch for the mains power. Just below the switch, there is an input for the AC adapter, which again comes with the Frerot as a standard or stock offering. So as I've mentioned a few times on this channel, when spending time with a DAC, I'm trying to wrap my head around so much more than just tone. What I'm focused on is spatial cues, how open or holographic the DAC presents the music, and even more, what the stage sounds like. I essentially have a checklist of must-haves when I'm trying to understand how deep and wide the stage is, how every instrument sits on the stage, and more. Reviewing a product like this does mean that it comes with the responsibility of setting up the rest of the system to allow us to hear these kinds of subtleties, and that does indeed start with the room and speaker placement. To better understand my method for speaker placement, check out the Lots video, as it might give a little bit more context as to where I'm coming from. Also, for those wondering about the associated equipment that I used with the DAC, I use the Holo Audio Serene preamplifier, benchmark amplifier, the Spatial Audio M3 Sapphires. I also tried the Frerot with a beautiful sounding Hagel H390, which sounded absolutely fantastic as well. And all the power cords and speaker cables are do-it-yourself kits offered up by GR Research. And last, the USB cable used is from DB Audio Labs. Last, all critical listening was from CDs that are ripped to my Inuos Zenith, and when listening for just pleasure and hanging out, I use Tidal and Qobuz streaming services. Alright, enough blabbering, let's dive in and get started. So the first few weeks that I listened to Frerot, I was just using the included AC adapter to get an idea of what this little DAC can do on its own or in stock form. After a few days of playing, I sat down and critically listened while taking notes, and the first thing that I noticed is just how deep and wide the soundstage is. This trait, along with the ability to recreate three-dimensional objects in the soundstage, is very difficult to pull off, and this little DAC surprised me how well it performed. While the DAC is superior with its staging capabilities, the Frerot left me scratching my head of how well it stacked up considering the price difference between the two. Even more, its ability to show off layering and separation was equally impressive. On one of my reference tracks, The Appeal from the Toadies album Heretics, I had the exact same experience with the Frerot as I initially did with the DAC. The initial organ sounds natural and palpable. It's only a few feet away from me and I can discern every detail about its size and its shape. The single tambourine hit that lights up the size of the space and the reverb smacking off all the walls gave way to a realistic and natural sounding performance in the room. Had I been blindfolded for this particular song, I'm not sure that I could pick out the DAC 100% of the time because both of these DACs sound incredibly smooth and they also lit up the entire listening room with a realistic and natural tone that pulled me into the music and it kept me totally engaged. So yeah, everything I just said is true and it's saying a lot. This indeed is a type of DAC that is easy to fall in love with because it simply makes the music sound beautiful, it sounds real and authentic. I don't hear a trace of sharp or painful edges in the recording, and even more, the recording sounds like a performance. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't get much better than that. Now with the external power supply, I'm going to say this. Maybe, if pressed, it's going to give you another 2 to 3%, but I want to be clear on where I heard those gaps being filled. The good news is nothing about its staging capability seemed to be affected by the power supply all that much, which means just getting the DAC by itself with the AC adapter, you will already hear what I like the most about this DAC. Setting that to the side, the external power supply does seem to help with bass impact, overall dynamics, and maybe just a little more spark in the overall presentation. With bass, I don't think the power supply is necessarily adding more bass, and if it did, I would argue that the DAC is broken. If anything, I think what is happening here is the same thing that happens when you feed a circuit constant linear power and keeps up with all of its demands. So while it can be said that there is a perceived tonal change with the power supply, I think a more accurate way to break it down is it's simply giving the DAC all the gas that it needs to sound its best. Getting to the point, the key differences with the power supply added seem to be more obvious with dynamic slam and the overall excitement of the performance. Now I want to get real for a second. The difference is minor, and it's minor enough that I don't think you should rush out and get the power supply immediately. I think trying the DAC out first, making sure that you like what it has to offer makes the most sense, and then adding the supply later would be the wisest approach in my humble opinion. What we have here is a nice sounding DAC for those who are tired of paper-thin performances and are willing to set up their system to breathe. I don't pretend to hear things that I don't, and I won't pontificate nonsense for the sake of a review either. Hear me. This DAC will not change or alter much of your system's tone other than just smoothing out some jagged edges. But if you have a stage to work with right now and it sounds a little flat or two-dimensional, the Frerot might fix that problem in a quick hurry. Also, while I'd continue to make the argument that while DACs can sound different from each other, it's rare that those differences are found in a DAC's tone. I want to clarify this statement before we move on to voicing of the Frerot, because what I'm about to say might sound like a contradiction. When I say we won't find key differences in tone, what I mean is this DAC versus any other DAC out there has a specific job to do when reconstructing a digital puzzle and putting it back together without any missing pieces. In this process, every single piece of that puzzle needs to not only fit where it should, but the end result should sound complete. Nothing in the bandwidth should be elevated, exaggerated, or pronounced. If this was the case, I truly believe that DAC is better served as a paperweight. So where's the contradiction? Well, I do think that a DAC's voicing can differ from one to the other, and while subtle, the voicing can be closely related to a shift or a change in tone. As an example, many audiophiles might like the voicing of saber DACs because they are generally regarded as analytical, precise, or detailed. But with Burr Browns, another generalization that is often made is they might be smoother, warmer, or perhaps refined. And yes, you guessed it, with the Frerot, this is true, and it's also what I've experienced throughout my audition. The DAC does indeed sound smooth and relaxed in the upper mid-range and a little warmer or robust in the lower mid-band. The Frerot is one heck of a nice sounding DAC, especially given its price point. It's refined and smooth, and it's easy to listen to for long listening sessions. Having a large, deep, and wide canvas to work with is always a good thing, and with or without the external power supply, the Frerot plays beautiful sounding music without even trying. Being up against many DACs that are being celebrated at its price point, like the Denafrips Aries or even the more affordable Bifrost 2, the Frerot does have a fight on its hands. With that being said, and knowing how it stacked up against the $5,000 May DAC, I wouldn't at all be surprised if the Frerot throws some decent punches and might even take the trophy. And with that, I'll see you crazy knuckleheads in the next video.